All right, we are live.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Atheist Republic Sunday morning hangout. I'm Lakeisha, and here with us today we have Allie, Armin, Philippe, Todd. Oh, Ray just joined us. I'm sure we'll have people dropping in as we go along. And today we're going to talk about, a lot of things sex-related, particularly the purity culture, purity movement, the obsession with virginity within a lot of religions and how that causes problems for people. We'll talk a lot about our own experiences, and hopefully we'll get some more feedback besides just Christianity, but this is a huge push in Christianity. The abstinence movement, especially in America, it affects the culture in a much broader context besides just within religion. So a lot of us have experience with it. We've talked about it within our team, and it's something that we are pretty passionate about, especially those of us who have gone through it as teenagers, to come out of all of that later in life and to find a place of healthy sexuality. And so I'm going to start with Allie. She wrote a blog post about this on atheistrepublic.com called Let's Talk About Sex, Baby. And so I'd like to start with Allie and just share a little bit of your experiences, what pushed you to write this, and then just some of your thoughts about the issue in general, and then we'll go from there.
Thanks, Nikisha. So I grew up in a very religious home where virginity was basically a girl's worth. I had 3 older brothers, and for me, seeing things unfold in my household, it didn't matter so much about my brother's virginity. My parents didn't care about that. They cared about my virginity and my purity, and because it was very stressed on me that that's basically what a man looked for in a woman. You could be illiterate. You could be anything, and nothing else really mattered. As long as you were pure, as long as you were a woman of God, that's what was needed in you. My job was to grow up, to find a man, to make babies, warriors for Christ. And that was my self-worth. That was everything that I was good for. So having that kind of mentality, going to high school when your hormones start to kick in and you start experiencing feelings, and you're starting to get into movies and songs and everything that talks about sex. And then it was even pushed harder by the church. I was forced to go to different camps and things like that at our church, where we were told, oh, if you're making out with your boyfriend, what are some examples you can do to get away from having sex? And it was just crazy. And this is the kind of discussion that we had about sex, not about safe sex, not what would you do if you found yourself as a sinner. Right? Because everyone's a sinner. So what happens if you do sin and you mess up and you get pregnant? No, we don't discuss that. None of those relevant things even mattered. How to prevent a pregnancy. None of that mattered, because you just weren't to have sex. You were to stay pure, stay holy, stay a woman of God. And I remember one of the most traumatic experiences for me was I was in intermediate school, and we had a weekend stay at a church member's house. It was a weekend Bible study, and we had these twice a year. And our parents were to pack $20 with us on our way there. They provided food, place for us to sleep, and all that stuff. And what they did was they put on a wedding for each of us, where each of us married Jesus. And the $20 was for a ring that we were supposed to wear, a purity ring, where we wore this ring until our husbands were allowed to take the ring off of us, and only our husbands could take the ring off, and that is when we were allowed to lose our purity. So it kind of dumbfounded me, because I knew a lot of the girls that were there. I had gone to church with them forever, and I knew firsthand that a lot were molested in the church, and so being molested in the church by a man, yet we're marrying God because we're pure, but we're not pure. And all of these thoughts just kind of swarmed through my head at such a young age. It was confusing. It was scary. I felt like the whole ceremony was just dirty and wrong. And so for me, the forcing of virginity as something special, something that makes you pure, is just, it's a lie. It's disgusting. It's disturbing. And it's absolutely something that has to stop. And that's what forced me to, I'm actually going to be doing a series on this, but that's what really, really encouraged me to go ahead and get this out there, because I know a lot of young ladies and a lot of young men alike are struggling with the fact that at home, their self-worth is their virginity, their purity, and that's just, it's insane to me.
It is profoundly disturbing, and when I explain it to people who didn't go through it, they are so appalled, and I'm not sure they completely believe me when I talk about the language that's used and what's expected. The word pure on its own and the word purity used to describe a person, I think, is just unconscionable in any context. I don't think that is a useful term. I don't think it really means, I don't think it can possibly mean anything positive when you use that kind of language, especially with young adults. I don't know. I can't even imagine a context in which the word pure would be a good word to use for a person. But it is particularly damaging, I think, to young people, and it's very confusing. It creates a huge cognitive dissonance between what their bodies are naturally doing, a lot of which they can't control, and then what they're supposed to control, and then what they are supposed to really want once they get married, especially for girls, what they're supposed to provide for their husbands, and willingly and joyfully, and all of these things we're taught regarding sex. And I think it's very, I know it's very damaging. A lot has been coming out over the past 10 years or so, more I think than I've ever seen, about the damaging effects of that kind of teaching on adult sexuality. So let's go to some other people who have some experiences regarding this issue, maybe as you were growing up or within it affects school curriculum as well. So I'm sure some people have experiences with that. Casper, Todd, I know you guys grew up in some similar contexts. I saw Todd phonetically nodding his head there. Either you guys want to chime in? Todd, go ahead. I know you have something to say.
I always do. I was going to defer to my equally fiery and opinionated Tennessee brother. My experience really with it growing up, my dad passed away when I was young, so it was just me and my mom, and my sex education happened around the 6th grade lunch table with the guys I sat with, and the other information that I got was a book that my mom gave me from James Dobson, who knows 2 things about sex: Jack and shit, and Jack's on vacation. So I didn't get a whole lot of good information about it. I did whenever I got into church and everything. I really became a committed Christian. I participated in the one of those purity ceremonies that had, like, the True Love Waits was the big campaign, and it was, looking back on it, it was really twisted, and it was very, very repressive. I remember another thing too that they were trying to do. There were several books. One particular one was called "I Kissed Dating Goodbye" or something, and it was, along with the True Love Waits thing, it was trying to change the dating paradigm in order to keep people from being alone together, so that your sexual purity wouldn't be threatened. There was a lot of weird things like that were done, and it was all about this obsession with sex. And honestly, I never, whenever I was talking to people outside of it, and even after having left the church, I don't have nearly as many conversations about sex as I did whenever I was in the church, because they're just simply obsessed with it, and it's really strange. It was really a strange thing to me. On the flip side of it, of course, I did the really good church boy thing. my ex-wife and I, we were, we didn't do anything until our wedding night, that kind of thing. So, but I will say it's difficult for both. It's difficult for men and women. I remember her telling me that sometime during that evening, our wedding night or whatever, she was kind of up thinking about things, and she started crying because she realized that there was that everything has suddenly changed. And it's a violent swing that you're given from, you can't do this. This is a thing that's very powerful, and it can ruin your life. And if you sleep with somebody, then you're sleeping with everybody they've ever slept with, and there's this real big culture of shame on it. And then suddenly, oh, you know what? You spent a few minutes standing up in front of people, and you got a piece of paper from the state, so now it's okay. Do it as much as you want. It's fine. It's great. It's the best thing you can do. It's psychologically traumatic, not only for women but for men as well. If you're a halfway thoughtful person, it's something that you struggle with, because it's so tied to personal morality, to who you are as a person, to your personal character. It's tied to so many things that are supposed to be reflective of who you are at your core as your identity as a human. To have it suddenly flip like that is a traumatic change. And to be honest, it's taken me a while. It's taken me getting away from all that shit, and it's taken me several years to get it out of my system and talk to people who actually have a couple of cells to knock around up here, to get away from that and to actually get a healthy, balanced view of it. So it's traumatic not only for women but for men.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I want to talk about too. There's been some articles written over the past few years about the adverse effects of purity culture on boys leading into manhood, and I remember talking to a male friend about this as well, who really illuminated a lot for me in terms of there's not as much of an emphasis on the purity component, or at least it's not processed the same way by the guys, but there's a huge emphasis put on not lusting, which is essentially that you're not supposed to have sexy thoughts about somebody who's not your spouse. And that's hugely problematic for a lot of the guys, especially. And the other thing to think about too is this is very heteronormative. This is very cisgendered, heterocentric talk as well. And so you have, statistically, the chances are you're going to have teenagers in these youth groups who are gay, who are trans, who are not cisgendered, who have all kinds of different variants in their feelings, especially at that time. They might even just be going through that whole process of what is my sexual identity, what is my gender identity, what is my sexuality like, and all of the language is boy, girl, marriage, and it's very damaging in that respect as well, I think. I would let's see, Casper's going to go next, and then I'd be interested to hear from some people who didn't experience this and maybe some of their perceptions or experiences in a cultural context. So, Casper.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? I got a new mic and stuff. Okay. So this is actually a weird thing for me, because I did grow up in a fundamentalist household where I was always told that sex before marriage was wrong, masturbation was wrong, all that stuff. However, on a personal level, I'm highly hypersexual. I always have been. It's an amazing thing that I'm actually married and in a committed relationship, honestly, because growing up I was like, monogamy is bullshit. I don't think I can be tied down to one person. So I actually, even though I accepted all the other aspects of Christianity for the most part, this was one of those things that I I don't know. I put off. I said, you know what, whatever. I don't give a shit what you think about this. Like, I've got to do something here, and I'm gonna still masturbate. And I had sex a lot before I ever got married. And as a Christian, it comes back to that cognitive dissonance thing. It's about what you're willing to cherry pick and put away. I figured this was not that big a deal. It's something I could just ask forgiveness for, so whatever. But I saw a lot of my friends had a lot of issues with it, and that was really upsetting for me, to see them going through it, because I wasn't going to deal with it. I wasn't going to let it control me in that way. And since then, since becoming an atheist, or coming out as an atheist, I've come to the position that the biggest cause for sexual deviance on this planet, besides true mental illness, is actually sexual repression. You look at people like the 19 Kids and Counting, the son Duggar, Josh Duggar. You look at him, and I can't honestly, I wouldn't excuse him for what he did as a child to his sisters and to that other little girl and whatnot. But at the same time, I put a lot of responsibility on the parents there. His parents never dealt with his sexuality and taught him to understand himself as a sexual being. And because of that, he explored however he felt like exploring. And I think a lot of that repression that comes in, it causes people to do things like that, because they're just like, I got to find out. And they get sneaky about it. They get devious, and you get this sort of deviant sexual behavior because people don't understand their own sexual identity and themselves as a sexual creature. So, and when you tell people, oh, it's a sin to masturbate, honestly, I would rather have everybody on this planet masturbating as often as they feel like, even if you got to take a break at work and go in the bathroom, be clean about it. But, that's better than people going out and raping each other, and you get these people that are like, oh, well, I couldn't hold it anymore. I had to go do something, and they end up doing crazy ass shit. And it's like, man, you could have explored that with somebody on a totally normal level. If you think, oh, I might like getting my ass whipped, there are people that you can do that in a healthy, stable environment. So it's a weird thing how the church is so obsessed with this, and religion itself is so obsessed with what people do with their genitals. And I'm just like, there's this God who's this supposedly omnipotent, all-powerful being, and he's concerned with what people down here are doing with their genitals. And that sounds like the stupidest shit to me. I mean, it sounds insane. Why would he care? What does it matter to him? I mean, it's an insane thing. And what it causes in people, that sort of repression and that lack of understanding of themselves and their sexual identity, it's horrible for people. And I hope that we could, eventually as human beings, we could come to an understanding that people, you have a sexual identity. Like, everybody does. Even if you're, asexual and you don't like sex, that's your sexual identity. And you need to come to understand that before it causes you mental issues and problems in your life. You need to come to and understand that and be educated on it early in life. I'm totally for sexual education in schools with my kids. I don't see any problem with that at all. So
I think that's another part of the problem for me as well, is that because of a lot of our religious history, particularly in America and here in Canada, just different degrees depending on where you are, but there's this impetus to teach abstinence, and basically what we've said as adults is that we don't want them doing it because that's the safest thing. But that came out of a desire to keep them pure and for them to wait. And so then it's not taught, and it's not taught at home. There's nothing about, and not just, obviously I'm not talking about the biology of it, but how to have a healthy sexual relationship, how to talk to a sexual partner, how to find out what you like and what you don't like, and all of those kinds of things. Even in really progressive sexual education programs, it's not addressed from that angle. And as Armin said in the sidebar, how to say no, consent, all the things that we're learning now that it's like, oh, hey, we need to tell people about this. And so some parents are getting on board, but it's really slow going for the schools. And so the kids who need it the most, the kids who aren't having those conversations with their parents, are the ones who are not getting it from school either. And the kids like mine who have been having these conversations with their parents since they were 4 and 5 are not the ones who need it in school. It's the ones who aren't having those. So when you say, well, leave it up to the parents, that's completely reverse of what it should be. Actually, the people who aren't getting it from their parents, that's why it has to be in school. Armin and Andrew and Philippe, I'd be interested to hear what your experiences are, particularly since you're outside of where we are, originally anyway. Armin, do you want to talk about what your experiences were, what you were taught, what sex is kind of, how it's addressed in Islam?
Well, I could tell you about how it's addressed in Islam in Iran specifically. What I learned later is that there are some variations depending on the country you're in. But my experience in Iran is that, at least in school, what they told us was that any not just sex out of marriage, just thinking about girls, looking at girls, or even being excited about hearing a girl talk is a sin. And the thing is that the problem with that is that if you actually believe that there is a God, it's not about just you not committing a sin. It's also about you not thinking about certain things. And as if you do take this seriously, as I did when I was a teenager, then at that age for a boy, this becomes very, very difficult. It becomes this is not exaggeration. I think that it's a mental torment, because at that age, around age 15, 16, these are the ages that you are supposed to think about these things. You are supposed to start discovering. That's your Makisha said you're just horny. Yeah. Yeah. Well. Yeah, we were at, but the thing is, I became more religious than my friends, and they, I mean, you can't get laid, obviously, but you can't masturbate, and you can't even think about these things. But the thing is that it's impossible not to do those things, right? And you're gonna fail, and you're gonna feel like shit, because guess what? God just saw what you did, and it's embarrassing, Think about your grandma watching you masturbate, but much, much worse, right? Because this is supposed to be the creator of the whole universe. You're supposed to be thankful for everything to this person, to this whatever it is, to this entity, and you're supposed to be so appreciative. You're supposed to, but all of a sudden you can't even forgo this small temptation. They call it a small temptation. Was it a small temptation? But the thing is that you can't even do that. Like, how unworthy are you? Like, you just thought about the most disgusting possible thing, and God saw all of that, and now you did what you did alone. Nobody, you don't know that nobody saw it. You think the creator of the universe saw it, and now you are ashamed, and you're begging God to please forgive me, I will try not to do this again. I will try. I promise. It won't happen again. It won't happen again. I won't let you down again. And then it happens again, and you start feeling like shit. You start feeling like the most disgusting thing. You know, the disgust. You know, you feel ashamed of who you are. Um, but so this was like, I mean, this was psychological torment to me. At that time, I assumed that this is not a deal for girls because we were told that girls don't really have that much sexual desires. It's just us, apparently. But that's obviously not true. And what we were, but later I realized that this it could have been actually worse for girls because for us, every time we give in to our desires is you know, you ask for forgiveness and you might be forgiven. But if a girl loses their virginity, there's no going back. You know, now now a lot of girls that have money, they pay doctors to get, you know, to do a surgery to get back their virginity. I don't know how that works, but for most girls, they're like, you're basically done. You are not a virgin anymore. Um, one thing I want to point out, you know, a lot of people point these out and they say like, well, these are just stupid, right? Yeah, it's stupid, but it's also genius. This is in religion, and it has an advantage to religion. If I read this book, I recommend this book by Dr. Darrell Ray. It's called Sex and God: How Religion Distorts Sexuality. And in this book, Dr. Ray suggests that the reason why religion makes condemns sexuality or masturbation is not to stop you from masturbating. It's actually because you will fail. And when you fail, you will feel that you need religion to purify yourself. So it's a method of keeping. It's a way of bringing you back to the church, bringing you back to the imam, bringing you back to God. You know, there's no better way of making sure that God is always on your mind by getting God involved in sexuality. That's a genius way for God to be always a big part of your life. When we say this is genius, it doesn't mean that somebody thought about it like, yeah, this is great. It's a great con. It's usually the same way evolution works. Just the religions that have the attributes that make them survive more just last longer. So it's not by, you know, someone's, you know, some genius con artist, but it's like a meme that survived. But that's just a theory. It's not been proven or anything, but it seems to be a very interesting and plausible theory. Anyways, I'm gonna pass it on to you.
Thanks, Armin. I think also, like, just like how fairy tales about monsters in the woods used to protect kids from going out into the woods at night because the way their culture was, there was no protection against that. Little kids were running around, parents were doing the work. They needed something to make sure that little kids didn't run off, and so they wrote stories, and those stories scared the kids into staying by the house. And I think in a lot of this similar way, a lot of these religious edicts about what God likes or doesn't like or wants or doesn't want did serve a certain amount of protection for humans when there wasn't birth control, when there wasn't a knowledge or an understanding of sexually transmitted infections. There was a certain cultural insulation against some of the things that other cultures might have struggled with because of these stories about this all-seeing being that would hate you or smite you or whatever if you didn't comply. So in that sense, I think it probably did serve a purpose. Now, I haven't academically studied this too extensively, but I know that there are some thoughts that again, like Armin mentioned, from a sociologically evolutionary perspective, it served a purpose and then continued. It survived. It went on because it actually was helpful in keeping those people alive, and then they had babies and passed those stories on to them, and so on and so forth. So, and then I think, beyond that, then it became this bizarre obsession with things like virginity, which isn't even a thing. There actually is no such thing as virginity. It's just a word applied to that one time before, up until the point where you have sex for the first time. And I might add, really, it's vaginal sex for the first time. Nothing else applies in that whole definition of virginity. So it's none of it really even makes any sense when you think too deep into it. Allie.
So I just wanted to touch on something that Todd had mentioned earlier about the effects of virginity on a marriage, like the night of the marriage. I had a cousin who grew up in a very small town in South Carolina, and she was also raised with kind of the same mentality. She was virginity. She was virginity, walking, talking virginity. That's what she kind of had going for her. So the night of her wedding, she called me crying in complete hysterics. She couldn't go through with it. She couldn't have sex. She was like, I know that tonight everybody who was at my reception, because they were all church members, everyone at my church Sunday morning, everyone who looks at me, my daddy is going to look at me and he's going to know what his little girl just did tonight. I can't do this. And that was so profound to me, like that somebody couldn't have sex on her wedding night because she knew everybody was going to know the dirty, nasty thing that she had done. So that night she didn't. She did not consummate her wedding that night. And the next day she did, right? Her husband finally talks her into it. She does it. He goes off and tells everybody. It's finally done. Finally. No compassion. He had no sense of understanding or anything. And she was devastated. She was completely broken. And that was a cue kind of into who this guy was. He was a complete jerk. Abusive, both emotionally, mentally, physically. But guess what? She lost her virginity to him. And that's also another thing that comes from a pure society, is the man you give your virginity to, that's the man you stick with. It doesn't matter if he gives you black eyes. It doesn't matter if he hits your kids to punish you. It doesn't matter what he does. That is the man that you are supposed to be with, or else God wouldn't have allowed you to do this in the first place. And so that kind of purity really plays a role, not just in sexual abuse, because it is complete sexual abuse that people put on children when they say your virginity is special, you're special because of your virginity, but it also helps set the foundation and the mold to allow women to continue to be abused in other aspects of the relationship surrounding her purity and virginity.
In addition to that, there's a huge amount of mental gymnastics that goes into play when you have compassionate Christian individuals who have these sincere beliefs and recognize that women get raped, children get molested. So then they have to come along and they have to come up with some sort of excuse for why that's not, no, you're still a virgin. But the thing is that all of those lessons, all of those things that kid's been taught their entire life, the messages they've been sent and the things they've been exposed to are still there. They can't overcome, a lot of times, they cannot do the mental gymnastics required to create some sort of alternate reality where now they're still a virgin. Like, it becomes profoundly traumatic. And there's extreme trauma that happens with a lot of these people, and it is hard for people to understand. It's like, oh, what's the big deal? So somebody told you your virginity is important, but it's not. Get over it. But it's hard to understand how, and I think Armin articulated it really well, that when you're a kid and you love God and you want to be a good religious person, that's really important to you, and to know that you're failing over and over again, or that something happened to you that you had no control over, but now you're seen as less than in the eyes of God. That's worse than any sort of disappointing a person, or it's difficult to understand unless you've been there, but it does create a lot of sexual trauma for a lot of people. Andrew.
Hey everyone, can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me? Awesome. I don't have anything as structured or possibly relevant to say as the rest of you guys, so you might be subjected to a bit of stream of consciousness / verbal diarrhea for the next minute. But while you guys were talking, I was thinking about how my upbringing impacted on me in terms of this topic in particular, and I guess the semi-conclusion I reached on this, and I'm not 100% solid on it, but I think I struggle to associate the Puritanism on a cultural level solely with religion, and I'll explain why in a second. But I think they are intertwined to a point where sometimes it's completely indistinguishable as to which one is driving it. But let me give you an example that might make that make sense. So I've said this in other Hangouts, but I grew up in an atheist family in a very non-atheist friendly part of the world, and so and they were atheists as well as liberal, both relatively and within the context of the Western world, if I can say that. And so I was never brought up with a double standard as to how I looked at my sexuality and female sexuality, but I have grown up to have that double standard. It's a position that I'm intellectually aware of, that it is wrong, that I have a double standard when it comes to how I perceive me acting on my sexuality and how I judge women acting on their sexuality as well. I know that it is intellectually wrong. I know that it is a horrible position to take, but it's visceral. And when I see it, when it happens, I recognize that that's happening, and I have to sort of talk myself out of that reaction. But point being, to link us back to what I was saying earlier about my upbringing, is that came from more of a cultural context than a religious one. You could say that the culture was, very much had religion infused within, and so therefore, how can you say that it was so, one or the other? But it was definitely not driven primarily by religion. This resultant double standard that I have. I hope that made sense, but I was just trying to put things into a context where I wouldn't necessarily always blame religion in specific for these kind of Puritan ideals still within society at large. And I point at myself in this example, and granted that's anecdotal and easily dismissed, but it is an example. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, or if no one has anything to say on it, then that's fine as well. I'm muting.
Andrew, do you think, before you mute, maybe I can stop you. Do you think that some of that is, I'm trying to see where my thoughts are. That some of that is maybe a societal construct or expectation or stuff that's around us that comes from religion or comes from, you use the word puritanical, which is actually a religious sort of approach to life. So do you feel that it's coming from that, or that it's something evolutionary that doesn't quite jive with where we are right now in time, or where do you?
I think it's difficult to say, Makisha. I think if you rewound for long enough, you might be able to find which one formed the other. But if you take Islam as an example, and I'll defer to the rest of the panel on Islam, but my understanding of their ideas on women and how they should be treated, and specifically in the Gulf, and how Islam kind of manifests in the Gulf, is that you had a nomadic culture living in the desert, and women were seen and treated as property by virtue of the fact that it was a harsh environment. The men led raids into other camps, if you will. I mean, it was an environment that fostered the idea that women had to be protected and treated like property. Did that happen before Islam, or did Islam appropriate it, or I mean, that's really that's really where your question would take us. I mean, where do you begin with this? Did religion was that the starting point, or did religion absorb something that already existed in the culture at large, and then now we are seeing it manifested on a level that is so as I said earlier, intertwined, that it's just difficult to say it's either this or that. But I mean, that's absolutely a fair question, and in my case, I hesitate to say that it's religion because I never grew up with religion. I grew up in a very atheist, you could even say anti-theistic family, and my parents were not puritanical. And I know it's a wrong term to use given the fact that they were atheists, and so therefore, by default, not puritanical. But you get what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
And so I don't know is my answer to your question in short form. But I think it's very difficult to trace back. I would lean towards it being more of a cultural thing than a religious thing. It's one thing that I don't necessarily feel 100% certain that I can point at religion and say, this is you. I think it's more cultural, and then religion might have appropriated it. But it's difficult to say, really.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think a lot of this does come from the reality that our cultures are patriarchal from way back, and some of that most likely had a role to play when humans were just becoming, and so it is interesting. I would actually be intrigued to hear more experiences from people who grew up as atheists in that way, because I think that it would help address some of the challenges we still have in culture related to women and treatment of women, and how it extends to how men experience their own identity and sexuality within culture, because I think it's such a different perspective than what so many of us have, and I think moving forward it's something that still has to be looked at, because even if religion, cause I guess that's what I'm coming down to, is even if religion didn't exist, these things would still be in some way, like there's still a patriarchal, male-dominated sort of perspective of relationships that still would have to be dealt with, because that's not how we seem to be wanting to move forward as humans, so it still need to be addressed. And I think atheists, particularly people who did not grow up entrenched in religion, would actually have a great deal to contribute to that. But it feels like atheists sort of say, well, we don't have religion to deal with in this regard, so it's not really talked about a lot. Like, I don't really hear a lot of it talked about, sex and sexuality relationships in the context of atheism. I would be very interested to see that happen. Philippe, I think you had some things that you wanted to say.
Hi all, hope you hear me. Okay, so that what Andrew said is very interesting, and what you said, Makisha, was interesting too regarding this. But I have a counter example. Is you have some matriarchal Islamic tribes, meaning that there were matriarchal tribes and they became Islamic, meaning the choice of patriarchal or matriarchal seems to be before the fact that you choose at least the three religions we have now that bothering us. Okay, so maybe there's something to explore about this. Very interesting what Andrew said about this feeling that double standard. I had this conversation with some young colleagues, and they were female, and she was explaining that in no way she could have multiple partners, because she would have the impression to be stained, to have dirt on herself, and that wouldn't be respectful for herself to have multiple sex partners. And there was this guy just behind her. He was like, yeah, right. And I was like, and I asked the guy, how many women did you have? It was quite a handsome guy, etc. He was just like, well, like, I don't know. And I was like, don't you feel ashamed to not respect your body like that? So I'm not a woman. And that says it all. I mean, it sums it up all. It's a cultural thing because obviously they were coming from the suburb of Paris and with some Muslim surroundings or very religious tainted social cultural environment because they were coming from Africa. So even if it's Islam or evangelical or whatever, there's always this idea in religion that sex is still a taboo. And even if you're fucking like hell, women or men, whatever, you're not supposed to talk about it. You're not supposed to tell. You're not supposed, it's always hidden. It's always like, men can brag about it, but women are always like, no, never. You know, it's no. I mean, it's crazy. I had this girlfriend. She was Muslim, but she was very dark-skinned. So a lot of people thought she was like Christian or something because she was coming from Africa and Morocco. And so we had a relationship for quite a while. So obviously she was not a virgin anymore, and in all the parts. And the first thing she did when she married a cousin. I mean, it's crazy. When I was talking to her, she was like, "I will never marry an Arab. I will never marry a Muslim. I will never marry somebody." And she ended up with the family pressure to marry a cousin, obviously Muslim, etc., etc. And the first thing that she did is to lend me money to have an hymen repair. Even if they had sex before, but for the marriage, she was supposed to be physically a virgin and to prove it to the family. I mean, it's absolutely perverted and crazy. And when you think about it, it's very well known here in France and in all Mediterranean surroundings that a vast majority of young Muslim women prefer to have sodomy than to lose their virginity. So even if they are, it's their first time and whatever, so they will give a hand job, they will give a blow job, and they will have sodomy rather than having vaginal sex because she must stay intact until marriage. It's so important. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. And as Armin was pointing out, it's one of the most powerful way to take control of somebody. We have two urges: to eat and to fuck, to reproduce. And those are the two things religion is focusing on. Don't fuck outside marriage. You're not allowed to eat this or that, or at this time, or you're supposed to that. To control you and to give you some unattainable goals. That's the whole point. You're supposed, as he was saying, to fail. And you know that you're going to fail. And the people who are giving you the goals know that you're going to fail. And even if you're very sincere, you find yourself in a position where you're having thought crimes. And you know you've been horny and you looked at this girl and you're like, and girls, it's the same. They look at the guy and she's like, oh my god, my tits are pointing. It's just, how am I going to do this? I'm a whore because my body is not obeying to my will and to the will of God. So I'm a pig if I'm a man, and I'm a whore if I'm a woman. You're always in a state of failure, and it's very easy when you feel that you are guilty of something, when you have somebody coming to you and say, I can ease your guilt. I'm here for you. I can bring you peace, and I can bring you to purity. And that's the main goal of in large, or say we are talking about sex purity there, but it's one of the things about purity. I had this experience when I was in India with my parents. Sorry, I make it short. And there was this goal of purity of the clothes. And it was so fucking impossible because you were supposed to clean it in a certain way to stay pure during the whole day so you can touch the guru or be in his presence and whatever. But there were so many ways to lose this purity that it was just fucking impossible to stay pure. I mean, just imagine we're in a gathering and we are all in the room with the guru and waiting. He's talking, and one of the women has her period just now. Everybody's there who is touching in contact and touching one another. We are all impure in like 10 minutes because she knows she has her period. And so she knows that because of her body, everybody around is not pure anymore. So the first thing she has to say is, I'm not Shuddham anymore. I'm not Shuddham. Tell everyone I'm not Shuddham, so no one Ashuddham would touch the holy guru, because that's and it's impossible. And that's the way they gain control of you, because you're going to fail and you know you are guilty of it. That's it.
Thank you, Philippe. Really, really good points. And I think the longer we talk about this issue, just the more angry I get, the more incoherent I start getting. But I think the point about the woman making other people unclean is really important. And I also think that, you know, if you can create a situation where you set up a set of rules where that makes somebody dirty, and if you imagine it like an actual physical dirt, and then in order to not be dirty anymore, that person has to go to a particular place, to a particular person, or say specific things that brings them back into the fold. So if you leave the fold, you get dirty. To get clean, you have to come back in. And you set up these rules that are impossible to keep. They're impossible to continue to follow. And so you're constantly going outside of the fold and getting dirty and having to come back in because you feel ashamed to get clean. It's a pretty perfect system because you're constantly keeping people in, and you're creating rules about things that are biological imperatives: to eat and to procreate. And so even though we have sex for pleasure now, our biological systems are saying, make babies, make babies, make babies. And so, you know, even for a woman who has, if you were to look biologically, kind of a typical cycle, there's a period of the month that lasts quite a long time where all you want to do is have sex because your body's like, there's lots of eggs in here, let's have sex, let's make babies. And so there's not like, and in order to make that happen, in order to have sex drive goes up, and you're surrounded by people, and you know, it's like, it's impossible. So it is like you said, food and sex. And so you create all these rules that you inevitably will break, and it will force you to come back because you feel so ashamed, and shame is very powerful. And it also creates profoundly dysfunctional relationships. When you enter a relationship with an automatic sense of shame and guilt and feeling dirty, it is really hard to get past that. And so you have so many people, women in particular, who have sexual dysfunction, and then they feel ashamed because they can't please their husband. So then they have to come back to the church because they can't please their husband. And then it just continues and goes on and on and on. I'm going to stop before I start getting on a roll. Armin, go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to Andrew's example. I wanted to first I wanted to say my story is actually provides a counterexample to what you said, because I was raised in a family that was didn't have any problem with being sexually open. My father actually encouraged it. My father actually, they both of them gave us sex education. At, you know, for me it was started at age 7, and my dad would actually told me that I would be a disappointment if I was still a virgin by age 14. So they were very pro-sex and everything, but I became anti-sex because of religion from school. So I do think that religion could have a strong influence on people, even if your culture is, if your environment is pro-sex. But these are just examples, so we can't really look at these, anecdotes and figure out the big trend. But if you do look at the trend historically, it does seem to suggest that, so are we talking about how the influence of religion on sex or on misogyny? Because if you look at it historically, yes, at least when it comes to Abrahamic religions, misogyny predates that by thousands of years, right? But being anti-sex did start with the Abrahamic religions, just being anti-pleasure in general. Well, I mean, even if it did exist, it didn't exist on such a mass scale. The ancient religions before Abrahamic religions didn't see sex as such a dirty thing. So, and around those times, around before Abrahamic religion and when the beginning of the Abrahamic religion, you can't say like, is this culture or is this religion? At those times, there is, it's almost impossible to find the line between culture and religion. There were politics, culture, and religion were basically the same thing. These days, you could find, you could point out that, okay, this is culture, this is religion, this is politics, but at those times, they were completely the same. And these days, now we have, okay, some things are culture, some things are religion. I do think that, yes, both culture and religion at some points do cause problems when it comes to how we treat sex, but I do think that religion, at least based on what we experience in Christian and Islamic countries, religion is a bit more, I would say, a much more powerful force. When it comes to culture, you could, a lot of young people will be like, well, fuck culture, fuck the society, I'll do what I want, right? But if you do actually believe in God, you're not going to feel comfortable by saying, fuck God, I'll do what I want. You're not going to do that. Or even if you do want to respect your culture, you might think like, well, maybe I do this, nobody's going to see it. When it comes to God, you can't say that, God is not going to see it. Or maybe you think that maybe I just do this, I get away with it, right? If you do believe in religion, you're not going to think that you could get away with it, So culture is still, a powerful force, sometimes in a negative way when it comes to how we view sex. But I do believe religion is a much more damaging force, at least today.
The all-seeing, all-powerful eye. Pretty powerful. Andrew wanted to respond to Armin and then Casper.
Just on one point you made, is it Armin or Armin? Because I think Armin and everyone else says Armin. Can we just nail that down once and for all?
You can call me whatever you like.
Okay. No, I think a fair challenge to what I said earlier was whether I was talking about misogyny or having an issue with sex, and I think I was referring to misogyny. I mean specifically within the context of the example I gave, which was my double standard. That's a misogynistic double standard. It's not an issue that I have with sex. It's an issue I have with the double standard as it applies across genders. I don't have a problem with me having sex. I have a problem, and again, I hesitate to use the word problem, but I have a visceral reaction to women having multiple partners that I'm intellectually aware is incorrect and should be stamped out, and it's a process, and I try. But just to answer that one point you made, I think, to make the distinction, which I should have made, I was referring specifically to misogyny and not an issue with sex. But that's a fair challenge. I'll go on mute again.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think it's probably a safe guess to say that you're not alone in that automatic response or reaction. I have it. It's hard for me, however, to parse out where that's coming from. Even growing up, I didn't agree with a lot of what was pushed on me about sex. I've had a lot of people ask me, how did you get over that? How did you get over being raised in that? I don't really know. I don't feel like I completely bought into it. I feel like a lot of it was superficial. I didn't agree with a lot. But that said, I don't know where that reaction is coming from. If it's been fed, I imagine it's just been fed to me from so many different angles that it's kind of an automatic thing that just pops up. You know, I see a girl with a lot of skin showing and sauntering down the sidewalk, or I hear a story of a teenager who's had a lot of sex by the time she's 17, I have a lot of thoughts that I automatically have to start judging and really analyzing, and I make an intentional point to do so, especially as the mom of daughters and somebody that, you know, I want my girls to have a healthy sexual identity. But I appreciate that you said that, because I do think a lot of people feel that way. And it's not an insurmountable thing, but it is intriguing just to step outside of myself and kind of look at that and look at where that's coming from and how that came to me and how I'm going to deal with it. Because I have to watch what I say around my girls, so there isn't, you know, so that stuff isn't inadvertently put on them, and they don't get the same baggage that that I grew up with. I've kind of lost track. I feel like Casper wanted to say something to close us out, but if anybody else has thoughts that they want to share before we wrap up, just raise a hand. So I'm going to go to Casper for now, and then after that, let me know if you want to talk.
So the other point I wanted to make is that I think that one area where we don't give enough attention to, that maybe we should put a little more focus into, is the effects of these ideas on marriage. When I look at many of my Christian friends and family and those that I know that are Christians, and I see a lot of high divorce rates and issues with adultery and stuff like that, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that getting into a marriage, they didn't understand themselves as sexual beings, and they didn't come into it understanding that part of a good marriage is being sexually compatible, because there is a sexual component to a marriage, and how much that can affect your marriage. If you're not sexually compatible with someone, it's going to cause a lot of issues in your marriage. It's going to cause so many problems, a tendency towards adultery and all sorts of other issues that can bleed over into the rest of your marriage. And you know, I've been married for going on 12 years now, and my wife, she actually was an atheist before me when we came into our marriage, and she actually brought me into understanding my position better. But one of the things, yes, we did have sex before marriage, and we lived together before getting married, and we came into it sort of understanding that what we wanted out of our marriage was a partnership. We wanted to support each other and to create a family where it was two human beings that understand that we could do better together than we could alone. And that there's all sorts of components that go into making that work, and sex is one of those components. So when you tell people no sex before marriage, you get these people that come in and they're like, oh, I have to remain pure until I get married, and then they get married, and you have women that are not very sexual, and you have men that are not very sexual, or you have a partner that's hypersexual, and you're not compatible on that level, and it plays into so much of your relationship, because then you get this feeling of contempt for your partner, because you're not receiving the attention you desire as a sexual being and such, and then you don't know how to respond to that correctly in a healthy way, and you've entered into something that is actually a contract between two people, that it's a contract that you can't actually uphold because you're missing a component that's necessary for you to uphold that to a more fair degree to everyone. So I think that's one of those components that we need to address more. Like the high divorce rates in the U.S. and other more secular progressive countries, where you still have a lot of religious people in those countries, I think a lot of that is attributable to this idea, and that's why there's so much adultery, and there's so many people that don't understand that they aren't monogamous. They weren't really just that's not the type of person they are, but yet they've entered into a monogamous relationship and they don't deal with it in a healthy way. So I just think that's one of those things that we should address a little more.
Agreed. Todd and then Philippe, please.
Just a real quick thing. The issue of morality comes up quite a bit, and I think another phase of this is the sex question, or the sex issue is an easy inroad to the issue of morality whenever you're talking to people about it. And one of the things that I think would be good to point out, because it's one of those things that seems to be prevalent in particularly the conservative Christian mindset, is that a more open-minded and freer concept of an approach to sex doesn't necessarily entail sexual proclivities or behavior that one would consider deviant. I would be hard pressed to. I think we'd be hard pressed to find that any of us with what we would consider a healthy view of sex would fall into, okay, well that necessarily means that we're going to be on the more extreme end of things. And I think it's sort of tied into that whole black and white thing, and the whole imposed morality thing. And speaking of marriages, people are held up as they're a paragon of virtue because they've been together this long, and that's not a goal for me. If you look at them, they constantly are walking around with the looks on their faces, and they carry themselves like they're holding pennies in their ass. And I don't want that kind of, I wouldn't want that kind of thing. I wouldn't want that kind of vibe, because that's just the thing that emanates from the inside, from the core of who you are. And for that kind of, that it's like how free must your sexual expression be, and how good must it be for you to carry yourself like that? I don't see that. Now, to go the other way, yeah, I've actually had people ask me, well, what, so you don't think you don't have the same views of sex as you used to, so what, are you all over here and everything like that, and I think, well, just because I think differently doesn't mean I've swung the complete opposite way. I mean, if someone comes up to me and says, hey, well, you're kind of into your thing. I like to have an umbrella opened up my ass while I sing show tunes, and I'm liable to say, hey, me too, but it's more of just a weekend recreational thing. It's not sexual for me. People are into whatever they are, but it's a more liberal, a more healthy view of sex, and a more balanced view of value between men and women, and an elimination of misogyny, which I think is tied to a healthier view of sex. I'd like to hear, and I'd like to read more about if a healthier view of sex is tied to a decreased occurrence of misogynistic views. But I think that's one of those things that's tied together, and I think that's another very important facet of this, and it's a good inroad to get into the morality discussion with people.
Thanks, Todd. And thank you for ruining Singing in the Rain for me forever. Awesome. All right, Philippe, and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, so very, very interesting point, it's very difficult to talk about such a vast subject in a very short time because there's so much to address. So to talk about what Casper was pointing out about sexual compatibility. We all know that pleasure is something that is very fragile regarding sex, and more of it about young women because they often have some guilt, they are not sure of their own body, etc., etc. And so obviously, how can you hope the other one to be able to know how to give you pleasure if you don't even know how your own body works and what you like? So you can address that for women because it's so obvious, but you can address that with guys too, because religious tend not only to tell you you're not supposed to fuck before marriage, but when it comes to marriage, they go into your bedroom to tell you, oh, that's not allowed. You're supposed to fuck this way because you're supposed to do it in order to reproduce, not only for the sake of pleasure. No, that's not good. No, doggy style, no. Anilingus, cunnilingus, oh no, no. Don't use your hand, don't use your mouth because it's not relevant in that matter. Okay, so what the fuck? How do you deal with that when you're stuck and you're a guy? For example, I have a friend. We had an orgy, and suddenly he discovered that he loved anilingus. He was 27, and it was suddenly a revelation because a woman was licking his ass. And he was just like, oh my God, I never thought about it. And we're in a very liberal country with no problem with that. He was an atheist, never been bothered with that. Just imagine a young, regular, I don't know, Bible-based guy, and just discovering that, ooh, that's tickling. How is going to deal with that? That I need some internal massage. Okay, that would be.
Thanks, Philippe. Leave it to the Frenchman. Close us off strong in a conversation about sex. And I love how he just tosses out, I was at an orgy one day. You know, this happened. That's great. All right. Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful, titillating conversation. Thank you for joining us, our panel here today. If you're watching, thanks for watching. Hope you're still with us. If you have some comments or thoughts about this particular issue or anything else, please leave them below. And if you have any feedback or any ideas for topics you'd like us to tackle in the future, you can email us. You can go to atheistrepublic.com, and we'll have all of our contact information there. We'll also have book recommendations, links to articles. Ali wrote a great short blog piece about sex on our website called Let's Talk About Sex Baby by Ali Jackson, and you can check that out on the website. You can just do a search for it. It'll pop right up for you. And if you value Atheist Republic, please volunteer if you'd like to write, if you'd like to edit, or you can also give financially through our website, atheistrepublic.com, and we will also provide a link to Ali's article down below. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you again next week.